Remember we met, I could tell by your smile. You hadn't been with a good girl like me in a while. Yeah, you were impressed, couldn't leave me alone. Text me every time that you pick up the phone. And I had control in the driver's seat, but my hands are slipping off the wheel. Now the tables have turned, now I'm up all night. I'm picturing you, acting like a fool. I'm on the other side, you're like a full moon, and I'm up all night, howling at you.
This week in my rants, I've been ranting and raving about some of the communities that make up what we call Mirador country, from Battle to Brighton. And I'm going to go ahead next week and mention some more. But the reason that mostly I've mentioned those that I have is because they have pretty active group books on Facebook. And some of the comments are pretty good. So there are a couple of groups that I'm going to mention all in one this morning, so forgive me for grouping you together because you're nowhere near one another. One is Hailsham and the other is Uckfield. Hailsham, quite interesting because it's mentioned in the Domesday Book, and it goes back to the ancient Brits being there. The Romans had a settlement there, the Normans had a settlement there, and so it developed, and even though it's not the largest town in the area, it's a quite important one historically. But one of the interesting things I found was that it's because it was close to where the Saxons landed, and they beat the Brits and took over the area. It was called a Little Sussex. But because they were the southern Saxons, they were known as South Saxons, which eventually became South Sussex and then became Sussex. So Hailsham is really where the name Sussex started and spread right across to beyond Chichester and up to the Hampshire border. I don't suppose that that's the entire story, but it is interesting that Hailsham should be the start of the Sussex name. An interesting little place it is, and I'm sure that perhaps they may be upset if I call it little, but we regard in Mirador country, we are a terrific TV for tiny towns, and we consider that all those towns that aren't the size of Manchester, Birmingham and so on, and even Brighton for that matter, are tiny towns, and that they must remain tiny towns, and that is their charm, and the glamour of them is that they are small, well preserved and very historic. So let's move just for the moment to Uckfield then, because on the River Uck, and it had a somewhat later start in life, but it is mentioned in the 13th century, and basically it was a stopping off point for pilgrims who would be going to Canterbury, and they would stop and they would get their refreshment there. And one of the things that was absolutely considered wonderful and a must-have, apart from a McDonald's hamburger, I suppose, was the pudding that was made in a pub in Uckfield. And every traveller was told to stop there and try and get a slice of this pud. And so the pilgrims did, and they would go to this local pub where it was made, and it still has a pudding lane in Uckfield. So if you go to Pudding Lane and find the nearest pub, one of the great pities about Uckfield is that it doesn't have too many pubs. That's one of its downsides, I'm afraid. Sorry, Uckfield, but perhaps get a few more built. But oh, perhaps you've got just enough. I don't know. But anyway, the pudding that the pilgrims ate in the pub there, and Pudding Lane is named after it. Interesting also that both communities tend to be on behalf of Cromwell and the Roundheads, Puritans, whatever you want to call them, Republicans in the English Civil War. And most of the South were Republicans, Lewis included. and the royalists were very anxious to swing us the other way. And there were several times that they tried to attack various communities and were diverted. And that's where, if we can bring Haywards Heath into the equation just very quickly, is where the Battle of Haywards Heath turned a royalist party back that were on the way to Lewis to have a go at the Newton family, who were prominent Republicans of the time. So the three towns, Uckfield, Lewis and Hailsham, are all bound together by the English Civil War, which saw eventually the king's head cut off, and then again 9 years later a return to the monarchy after Cromwell had managed to stop people wearing makeup, stop people eating mince pies, banned Christmas, and expected people to work 7 days a week. Good for you, people of Hailsham and Uckfield and so on, for casting him off after giving him that support. I don't think I could live under that regime at all. All right, another interesting fact or two about some of the towns and the start of the name Sussex. See you. You can tell I've talked too much. See you next week. Toodle pip.
If ever I had a video, would you dance in it? Would you dance?